And welcome to Spectrum News at 2. I am Uyai and Yekan coming to you live from the beautiful hills of Ibiakuran. Let's take a look at the headlines. Announces mini bid round, eyes new modular refineries. Senate postpones passage of 2023 budget till after Christmas. Plus, United Nations Security Council adopts first ever Myanmar resolution. We'll bring you details of these stories and more in a moment. First in our news this afternoon is a report that the federal government, through its Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, has announced the 2022 mini bid round to spur new oil exploration and drilling activities in the prospective deep waters offshore Nigeria. It also announced that 3 modular refineries will refine crude oil in 2023, as this will boost in-country refining capacity. According to the Nigerian Content Development Monitoring Board, both agencies disclosed these to journalists at separate oil sector events in Abuja. Announcing the Nigerian mini bid round 2022, the Chief Executive NUPRC Benga Komolafe said this was the first in a series of bid rounds aimed at further development of the country's prospective petroleum basin. He said the exercise would be for ensuring compliance with petroleum laws, regulations and guidelines in the Nigerian upstream petroleum industry. In another development, the federal government has said it will not be able to complete the narrow-gauge Eastern Railway corridor before President Muhammadu Buhari leaves office in May 2023. The Minister of Transportation, Muazzez Sambo, told State House correspondents at the end of this week's federal of the foreign loans required to fund it. Recall that in April 2022, construction of the 2,044.1 kilometer Port Harcourt-Maiduguri narrow-gauge railway project began, and the Minister of Transportation at the time, Rotimi Amechi, who inspected the commencement of work, said the project would stimulate economic activities in the 14 states, including 5 southeastern states. In the meantime, the Federal Executive Council has approved a total of 386.7 billion naira for various projects in the Federal Ministries of Power, Police Affairs, Environment, Works and Housing, and Transportation. The various ministers revealed the respective memorandum approved by the Council and the corresponding amounts earmarked for the projects shortly after this week's Federal Executive Council meeting. Revealed that the Council approved a memorandum for the provision of alternative power supply to line to Maiduguri, the Borno state capital, which he said had been disconnected from the national grid for 24 months due to insurgency. On legislative matters, the Senate has postponed the passage of the 2023 budget until Wednesday, December 28, 2022. The lawmakers also postponed the passage of the finance bill till December 28. Senate President Ahmed Lawan, who made these announcements during plenary today, explained that the Senate is postponing the budget passage because of some challenges in receiving the report on the 2023 budget from the Appropriations Committee. The reason for this, he added, is that the appropriations bill came to the National Assembly from the executive with some problems, and when the committee came to reconcile the figures, the challenge became obvious and difficult to deal with. Currently addressing the House of Representatives over the latest policy by the Apex Bank, which among others sets limits to cash withdrawals at the deposit money banks and other financial institutions. According to Ahmed, The CBN observed that about 94 and 82% of personal and corporate transactions, respectively, had been electronic, meaning that the majority of Nigerians will not be adversely affected by the reviewed limits, noting that the Apex Bank introduced the new policy in phases, with successes recorded in some of the states where it was launched. While responding to a question on why the move is coming a few months before the general elections, recall that the House had summoned the governor of the CBN, Godwin Emefiele, who failed the two previous appointments with the lawmakers. However, CBN had informed the House that Emefiele would not appear before the House in person. Rather, Ahmed would lead the Committee of Governors before the lawmakers. Away from that, the Chief of Naval Staff, CNS Admiral Gambo, has hinted that some personnel is colluding with criminal elements to sabotage the efforts of the Nigerian Navy at curbing illegal bunkering and crude oil theft in the country. He made the disclosure at the decoration of the newly promoted Rear Admirals in Abuja, where he warned that any personnel caught will be made to face the stiff penalty of the law. Meanwhile, the Chief of Defense Staff, Lucky Rabo, who was at the event, tasked the Navy with the elimination of crude oil theft in the country. In the midst of the celebration, the CNS urged them to remain loyal to the President and the country as a whole. He further warned that any personnel caught sabotaging measures put in place by the Navy will meet the wrath of the law. In the meantime,
of personnel still colluding with criminals to sabotage these efforts. Let me therefore warn that any act of collusion with criminals to sabotage of measures in place to checkmate illegalities will be met with stiff sanctions in accordance with the laws of the land.
The blue economy certainly will be exploited further. And I believe that as we continue along the path of fleet capitalization, which the government has placed emphasis on, then of course the Navy and domain ceases to exist.
On electoral matters, President Muhammadu Buhari has affirmed readiness to campaign for the All Progressives Congress APC presidential candidate Bola Tinubu and other candidates of the party in the 2023 general elections. Presidential spokesman Garba Shehu, in a statement, said the president is ready for the 2023 campaigns with full energy and conviction. According to the statement, the president's move is to dispel expressed concerns in certain quarters that the president has not featured in campaigns since the national launch in Jos, Plateau State, and to all times. In the meantime, the European Union, EU, in response to the invitation by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has decided to deploy an EU election observation mission, EOM, which consists of 11 election experts, which will arrive in Nigeria during the first half of January, and 40 long-term observers who will join the mission to observe the general elections scheduled for 25th February and 11 March 2023. A statement by the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, Josep Borrell, said Barry Andrews, member of the European Parliament, has been appointed as chief observer for the EOM tonight for the consolidation of democracy in Nigeria and for the stability of the region. Reports say this is the 6th time the EU deploys an election observation mission to Nigeria, reflecting its commitment to work together to consolidate democracy in the country, stressing that the EU EOM will provide a comprehensive, independent and impartial assessment of the electoral process based on international and regional standards for democratic elections. We move now to Africa, where the United Nations, under Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations Jean-Pierre Lacroix, says there has been a relative but not insignificant improvement in the security climate of the Central African Republic, CAR. Lacroix said this during an official visit to Bangui, the capital of the CAR. The United Nations Under Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, also stressed that there is more work to be done to ensure stability in the troubled Central African nation. Recall that Central Africa has been battling civil war since 2013 and is at the heart of Russia's bid for strategic influence in Africa. The force was the target of deadly summertime protests by Congolese who said armed groups were still roaming the country's east and they were not being protected. Peacekeepers were also accused of retaliating against demonstrators. Some strongly condemns all domestic and foreign armed groups operating in the country and demands they immediately cease all violence and destabilizing actions and the illegal exploitation and trafficking of natural resources. On the foreign scene, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has told American lawmakers in Washington that United States assistance for Ukraine is not charity, but rather an investment in security.
Ukraine
Zelensky,
is alive.
who gave a Ukrainian battle flag to the United States lawmakers following an address to a joint session of Congress, said the flag was from the frontline city of Bakhmut, which he visited a day before making his first trip outside Ukraine since Russia invaded in February. The Ukrainian president also vowed his country would never surrender to Russia. To release Aung San Suu Kyi as it adopted its first ever resolution on the situation in the turmoil-ridden Southeast Asian country. Reports say the adoption marks a moment of relative council unity in a year in which divisions have been heightened by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It also demands an immediate end to all forms of violence and asks for all parties to respect human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law. United its violence across the country and free prisoners. Recall that Suu Kyi, now 77 years old, has been a prisoner since the army toppled her government almost 2 years ago and violently cracked down on dissent. Still to come in the news. Arsenal's goal versus Man United confirmed among 6 VAR mistakes this season in the EPL. Do stay with us.
Season's greetings from Spectrum TV.
On our business news, terminal operators operating in the nation's maritime sector under the aegis of Seaports Terminal Operators of Nigeria, STOAN, have said the 2006 port concession has saved Nigeria $16 billion in 16 years. The chairman of the STOAN, Vicky Hastrop, who said this in Lagos, stressed that the exercise has injection of private capital into port development, freeing up government resources for other developmental purposes, elimination of port congestion, modernization of the port, improved availability of cargo, handling equipment, competition among terminal operators, improved welfare and training of port workers, and the institution of a condition of service for dock workers. Recall that the federal government had earmarked operators. Meanwhile, the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency have attributed the high cost of foodstuff in the country to the war risk insurance premium on Nigerian-bound vessels and cargoes. The Director General Nimasa Bashir Jamo, who said this in Port Harcourt, pleaded with major insuranceization of the war risk insurance on all Nigerian-bound cargoes was a deadly blow to the economy as its negative impact on the cost of goods is felt by every Nigerian. Jema said Nigeria has done so much to stamp out piracy on its territorial waters and the Gulf of Guinea, adding that the country deserved the international insurance company's consideration. In Hell, the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital Yaba in Lagos State says it has attended to 77,071 psychiatric patients at various outpatient pharmaceutical service points in the hospital. The medical director of the hospital, Dr. Olubenga Owoye, disclosed this during the hospital's presentation of the 2022 annual report. He said the hospital catered for some indigent patients on admission, as a total of 24 indigent patients were catered for and medications worth 1.35 million were dispensed to them. Meanwhile, the Nigerian Medical Association NMA Ogun chapter has urged patients and their relations to channel their complaints to appropriate quarters. He said that the patient or relative should express their grievances to appropriate quarters and avoid attacking doctors. In sports, former UFC champions Israel Adesanya and Kamaru Usman remain in the top 3 of the latest UFC pound-for-pound rankings, despite both losing their belts in 2022. The rankings were reportedly updated after the final pay-per-view of the year at the UFC 282 in Las Vegas. Reports say Adesanya takes the number 3 spot in the latest rankings after he had previously dropped to number 5. This is the first time. Still in sports, a panel has confirmed that there were 6 incorrect video assistant referee VAR interventions in the first part of the Premier League season. The panel was made up of 3 former players and a representative from the Premier League and the PGMOL. The referees body, I beg your pardon. Reports say the 6 incidents were selected from 48 VAR overturns. It included Gabriel Martinelli's disallowed goal for Arsenal at Manchester United. Martinelli thought he had given the Gunners the lead in the 12th minute of the match at the Old Trafford in September. But Lee Mason, who was on VAR duty, told referee Paul Tierney to disallow the goal because of what he had judged to be a foul by Martin Odegaard on Christian Eriksen. The other 5 decisions found to be incorrect included penalties awarded to Crystal Palace and Brentford in matches against Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest, respectively. On our entertainment news, Africa's longest running and most successful drama series, Tinsel, has hit a new milestone. The show is hitting the 3,500. Africa Magic is releasing a documentary titled Through the Decades, a Tinsel Story, which follows all the changes, faces, improvements and even losses the show has experienced over the 14 years of being aired on television. And that's all we have for you at this time. Do ensure to follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtv.ng. You have been watching Spectrum TV News at 2. I am Uyai Anyek, and thanks for watching and do enjoy the rest of your day.